Hello, I'm Megs Reynolds, the Executive Director for the Do MoreAgriculture Foundation. We are the national voice and champion for mental health in Canadian agriculture. And joining me today is Joan Malarchuk, and she is Clint Malarchuk's wife. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We are today talking about addiction, and our conversation is about being the support person for someone experiencing addiction. And so, my first question was, when did you realize that your husband was dealing with and struggling with addiction?
Wasn't right away. Because in my experience with somebody who drank and drank too much would be they would be slurring their words. They would be not able to stand up. And I would see friends would come over when he was in town. He was out of town quite a bit for weeks at a time because he was coaching hockey. So when he was in town, friends would come over and they would bring 30 packs of beer and they would be drinking from 2 o'clock until almost, 11 o'clock at night. But he never seemed to stumble and to slur his words. It probably took me almost a year of this going on and of him when he'd come in at night, he would always get into this mode of being very self-conscious and asking all these questions. Why do you love me? Are you sure you love me? Why did you marry me? And it was the same thing every night. But I would ask his family, what do you think this is? This is odd. Is it because he's drinking too much? And I was given the answer that no, it's his anxiety and his all that and his obsessive compulsive disorder. That's what's causing it.
Mhm.
It seemed weird to me. So I think it was probably about after 8 months of this going on where I started to just monitor, which I
Right.
found out was being an enabler, but I was very good at it, how much he was drinking. And then I started to research on the internet and kind of ask questions like, you had like a whole 30 pack.
Right.
That can't be healthy for you. And I started to question whether or not that was the reason that his OCD was kind of getting worse, his anxiety was getting worse. So that was the first time that I actually thought maybe he does have an addiction to drinking. But even at that point, I really didn't know what that meant.
Hmm. It's hard because we don't know, right? We don't learn about it. And so, your comment about maybe being an enabler at the beginning, I know that it can seem that way, but I think you and that time you were trying to figure out what was going on without knowing the signs and the symptoms to look for. And that's such a hard conversation to have to talk to somebody about, I think you're drinking too much, or I think you're doing this without feeling confident in understanding what's going on or being able to, like you said, you were tracking and you were starting to try to figure out what was
Yeah.
there.
Because I would ask his friends that were here, and I would say, hey, maybe you guys, don't stay so long. Maybe don't, have him drink so much. And they would say, why? He's great. He's the life of the party. He
Mm,
loves us. He's happy. He perfectly fine. And I would say, yeah, but when you guys leave and he comes in, he's a completely different person.
mhm.
And he's not the happy-go-lucky. He's completely different. And they would brush it off as, oh, no, that's no big deal. He's not having any more than we're having. He's fine. So then you start to wonder, maybe I'm crazy.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm seeing something that's really not there. So you kind of go back and forth for a long time.
Yeah. How did you initially start to have some of the conversations once you felt you were in a place with kind of tracking what was going on and how much was being drank that you felt like that was something you needed to talk to him about and not just family and friends?
He really started to become just a different person. Um, it was almost like it would turn into Groundhog Day every night that he was home, like clockwork. People would leave and then he would come in and we would start off, we need to talk.
Right.
And I would be like, oh God, here it comes again.
Mm.
And it was the same questions. Why do you love me? Are you sure you love me? You only love me for my money. And no matter what answer I would give, if I would immediately say, I do love you, that's why I married you, his answer would be, you answered too quick. Maybe you're just saying that, so I'll quit asking.
Mm.
And then the next night, if I paused a bit, well, no, I think you're thinking about it. So maybe you really don't need it. Maybe you have second, guesses. And it continually going on, and it was just getting longer, and he was getting worse. And it went from happening maybe a couple of times a week to like every single night.
Oh,
So then I started questioning. I know he's on medication for his obsessive compulsive disorder, and maybe his drinking is causing the medication effect, and I didn't know.
mm,
So that's when I would start asking him, well, maybe you should cut off on the drinking a bit. And at those few hours the next morning where he was actually normal,
yeah,
you could talk to him and he would agree. He would say, yeah, 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 I probably should. I probably should. But then as soon as that 1 or 2 o'clock rolled around, as soon as people showed up, it was almost like once he had one, he just couldn't stop.
yeah. What that would have been very, very hard for you. What were you able to reach out to someone else, either a friend or a professional, to, your comment about I felt like I was crazy, to kind of talk to someone else about what you were experiencing and have some support to see the patterns and the cycles and help you with maybe boundaries or just give you direction on how best to kind of navigate what was going on?
I did, but nobody had any answers. I mean, most everybody that I talked to, it was his friends that were around here, um, said he was fine and
Mhm.
that, he's just having some fun, letting some steam off. The family members at the time that I talked to would tell me that that's just how he is. He's very, he gets self-conscious and you just have to reassure him and reassure him. And I was thinking to myself, this is crazy. This is like a, 4-year-old, like,
Mm,
get yourself together.
yeah.
I would reach out to a few of his hockey friends. Um, I would actually get into his phone and I would reach out to some hockey people that kind of knew his past.
Yeah.
Um, they were the ones that said, maybe you need to get him in to see a doctor because maybe his medication's off.
Mhm.
But at that point, that was the only thing. Nobody really said, this is what's happening. I was kind of blindly trying to figure it out all on my own. And it wasn't until he actually started commenting that he wanted to kill himself that then I started reaching out to, um, trying to reach out to doctors, psychiatrists, and
Mhm.
the only answer I was getting was, well, has he harmed himself? And I would be like, okay, well, is that a thing that he's actually going to harm himself? He wants to kill himself. And they said, well, until he harms himself or he harms you, there's nothing we can do.
Wow, I'm
So
so
I
sorry.
said, well, can I have somebody look at the medication he's on? Because at the time, he didn't have a doctor that could look at his medication. He was just getting it through the NHL. And you don't have to actually see a doctor. You just tell them what you want and they just prescribe it. And he was getting it. And so what was happening was he had been on that medication for so long that I think they said his body was becoming immune to it.
Mhm.
And then the alcohol on top of it
Mm.
was exacerbating everything that was happening. So the doctor said, well, we didn't prescribe this, so we can't comment on it. Um, I said, well, can I get him in to see you? Oh, yeah, we can get you an appointment, but it was going to be 3 to 6 months out. And I said, well, if he broke his leg or cut his neck, I could take him to the emergency room. Can I bring him into the emergency room? And they said, yeah, but they're just going to like look at him, calm him down, and send him home. So I thought there's nothing, nobody's willing to help me. I would get so mad. I was calling the doctors every day, all day long, saying that, by the time you can give me your help, I'm not going to need it because he's going to be dead. Because he wants to, at this point, it was getting worse. And he was talking about wanting to kill himself, not wanting to live anymore.
And was that at night when he was drinking and when he would come in and have the conversation with you?
Yeah. And then a few times during the days when some of the friends wouldn't be here, I teach figure skating. I would come home from teaching figure skating at 2 or 3. And if there was nobody here and he'd been drinking, he would just be beside himself saying, you don't know what it's like to live in my head. This is miserable. And then I would try to talk to him well, maybe you should go see a doctor. And he was just dead set on nothing's going to work. I hate being like this. And I think what I know now is when they're in that mode of the world's against me, I can't even keep my head straight. They think that nothing's going to work. Nothing's going to help them. So why go see another doctor? That's just going to be a trial and error. And he didn't really want anyone to know.
Right. Yeah. So how did, I mean, that's incredibly scary and frustrating. How did you get from that point? Was it him like finally getting to a place of being able to acknowledge and accept
No.
to be able to move forward? Okay, so what?
Oh, he was not, he didn't want anyone to know. He didn't want me to tell anybody. And even at that point too, I was afraid to tell people too much of what was going on. That, and they probably could have helped. They probably would have been fine, but you just don't know because he was still coaching in the NHL. So
Mm,
the question or the comment was put to me, don't tell anybody because I don't want to lose my job.
yeah,
So I kept it and I thought, what if it reflects on me? What if I tell them what's happening and then they don't want to be around me, or I lose my job, or people start, it becomes this whole convoluted situation that you're stuck in and you don't know how to get out of. So one of his hockey friends, his name was Rick Dudley. I'll never forget this. When I first met him, he said, if you ever need any help with this guy right here, because he can be crazy, he says, you call me. So I did. And I said, I need to get him in to see a doctor. I'm calling every day, but I can't even get him to agree. Can you please come down here and help me? So he did. And we didn't tell Clint. So he just showed up one day. And lucky for me, the day before he showed up, I had actually gotten the mental health facility in Carson City here I got him an appointment. And this guy talked him into going. So I'm thinking, great, life's wonderful. I'm going to get him in. We're going to get this figured out. We get there and we're sitting in the waiting room, and the nurse comes out and says, I'm so sorry, but the doctor you have been scheduled to see is gone. He had to leave last night for an emergency. So I thought, okay, well, they put me in with somebody else. I said, okay, is there somebody else? She says, no, you'll have to make another appointment. She hands me a pamphlet and then proceeds to open the door for me and say, thank you, have a nice day. So
wow.
I'm standing there looking at his friend Rick saying, this is what I've been dealing with. I don't know what to do.
Yeah,
So I think this was a godsend. My phone rang, and it was another doctor that I had been calling and calling and calling and just begging. I mean, if you have 15 minutes, can you see him? So he did. He said, yeah, I can see him. So we got him in, and I thought, thank God, this is where it working out. But then halfway through sitting down in the meeting with him, Clint gets up and says, I have to use the men's room. And it was like 10 or 15 minutes later, his friend Rick and I are looking at the doctor. I'm like, where's Clint? And he's been gone quite long. And I said, well, jokingly, we didn't ask him where he was going to use the men's room. So my guess is he's gone. And he
yeah,
thought we were going to lock him up
right.
and, throw away the key. And he was going to be in a mental health hospital with just
Mm,
crazy people. So we were about a half an hour drive away from our house at this doctor's office. Clint was walking back home. we ended up we got in the car and we just started stopping by I figured there's hockey on. He's still employed by the NHL. So he's probably going to try to watch a hockey game. So we just started stopping by all the sports bars and asking him, have you seen this guy? Have you seen this guy? And they had, and he was just kind of making his way downtown. And we finally get to where he's at, and he's in a bar trying to watch the hockey game. He's arguing with the people because they didn't put it on. They kept flipping the channel on him, and they had called the police. So the cops were there to arrest him. So he got arrested. And at that point, I thought, okay, this is bad. He's trying to fight the cops. One of the cops wasn't even listening to me. He was just telling me, keep quiet, sit down, or I'm going to arrest you. Myself and his friend Rick were trying to tell the cops, look, he just came from a doctor, his medication's off. If you just release him to us, we can get him the help he needs. That never happened. He got arrested, but later that few hours after he got arrested, they said they were going to put him on a 72-hour hold at the mental health place. So then I thought, great, I'm getting things organized, we're getting things straight. And after that, and when he got out, 72 hours later, he was better. He kind of he went back to the original psychologist or psychiatrist that we had seen. Because I called him up and said, look, he did get arrested. You call, and everybody was connecting and everything was working out. Clint got out and life kind of resumed for a little bit. Things were good. And I thought, okay, we've got a hold on this. We fixed it. And I chalked it up to his medications off. It wasn't working anymore. And the alcohol was making everything worse. So life was good for a bit.
And was that so after things were good for a bit, was that when you kind of realized that it was, the medication had been sorted and it was now alcohol that was kind of being the main influencer for what he was going through?
Yeah. And after talking to him and talking to the psychologist, psychiatrist, he had said that alcohol would work if he was very anxious. It would calm him down. And if it was depressed, it would kind of lift him up. But it only worked for a little bit.
Right.
So he knew that that's what he was doing. And then at that point, I knew that's what he was doing. And the doctor he was seeing was trying to get the medication right, which I know Clint said it's kind of like trying to get the right cocktail mixture, that it takes a while because you have to be on this medication for like 4 to 6 weeks before you know if it works or it doesn't work. So at first it was good. And then I noticed him falling back into the same thing. And he was just quickly getting worse. And he would go see this doctor and I would say, how did it go? And his comment was, it was fine. He put me on some more medication. And we talked about hockey. So I was like, you talked about hockey? He goes, yeah. And he gave me some medication because I can't sleep. And then the next week it would be, well, I wake up groggy. So he'd come back from this doctor saying, now he gave me some medication to make me not groggy when I wake up.
Right.
So what was happening was he was just getting put on medication after medication after medication. And I even thought, this is not working. You can't take a pill, if you're sleepy, to wake you up. If you can't sleep, to put you to sleep. He was taking pills all day long. And then the suicidal thoughts just started coming back and they were getting worse. And he was just a mess for probably like 3 months. It was living with that obsessive person again, wanting to talk about life and everything at night. And it was an hour and a half, 2 hours in the morning where he was fine. And then he would just go right back to being suicidal, not wanting to live. Yeah. And life just, I didn't know what to do. I was reaching, I thought I had a doctor in place that would make things fine, but nothing was working. Nothing was working. Everybody was beside themselves. And at this point, he's an adult.
Yeah.
So unless he agrees to want to get help, there was nothing anybody could do. People would come over and talk to him. And he was very good at telling them what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And being able to act and pull it together when people were around. But then when everybody would leave, he would go right back to his, I hate my life. I hate my head. I don't want to be here anymore. There was one time where I came home and he was just beside himself. He threw all my stuff out onto the back porch. Like literally almost everything that I owned was piled on the back porch. My parents, my mom and dad, were still alive at that point, and they were very supportive. They just kept encouraging me that, that's not the Clint that you married. That's the alcohol talking. And you need to try to get him into a rehab center. Well, I didn't know, how do you get a hold of a rehab center? He's not going to want to go to a rehab center. So I didn't know where to start, where to call. I would comment to him, you need to get into a rehab, call your hockey friends, they can help you out.
Mhm.
Um, Nothing. He wasn't going to do it. And that's when, was it 2008? Yeah, October 7th. I had gotten home again and I couldn't find him. He always had two phones on him. He had a, because he worked for the NHL still, he had his hockey phone and his personal phone. And I'd been calling. And in fact, I didn't even stay at the house that night before, just because I think that was the first time I thought, I just need to get away. I need to get a night where I'm not worried every hour what's going to happen. And that's hard because you don't want to leave and then have something happen because you think then it's your responsibility.
There's a lot of guilt.
Yeah. And then I had also gone to that morning, I had gone to an Al Anon meeting. And I thought, well, everyone says to go to an Al Anon meeting, so I'll go. Um, it was different. The meeting I was at, I know they say you have to go to a lot of meetings before you find the right one. The meeting I was at was just a bunch of people complaining about, and I thought, well, I don't know how good this is going to help. And then
Mhm.
when I got home and because I couldn't get a hold of him and I was looking for him, he was sitting out in the back behind a shed we have. And he had like a 22 rifle, not a handgun. Um, and I asked him, what are you doing? He was drinking. He had some beers next to him, and I could tell he'd been drinking, and he was just not in the right mind, not in his head. He said, I'm sitting here. You don't know what it's like to live in my head. You have no idea what it's like to be me. And he talked for a while, and then I remember he stood up, he grabbed the barrel of that gun, shoved it under his chin, and said, this is what I wish would happen. And the gun went off. And I remember at that point, I was probably just 3 or 4 feet away from him. I thought, my first thought is he's still standing. I thought, you're still standing. What happened? And he dropped the gun. He looked at me and said, look what you made me do. I mean, I knew I didn't make him do it, but you're thinking, part of you thinks, yeah, why didn't I get you help earlier? How could I have not have helped you? So I had my phone on me. So I was called 911. The paramedics came. He didn't want to get in the ambulance. I remember he was dead set against it. And we live in a very small town. So we have a dog catcher that's a friend of ours. So she had a police radio. So my phone was ringing. People were calling me. What can I do? What can I do? A few of his friends had come over. I said, well, he's not wanting to get into the ambulance by that, but the police had gotten there. The ambulance had got there. So everybody was calling. They got him to the hospital and they said that he's fine. He's going to be fine. There is a bullet in his head.
Wow.
We're gonna sedate him and we have to do it right now to see if we can take it out. So when they did that, that's when I just started calling family members and telling them what was going on. Then I got a call from one of the policemen that had been there when I first called, and he said, you had said this, because I had told the police it was an accident. Because Clint, while I was on the phone, had told me, you don't tell them that I did this, because if you do, I will never get another job in the NHL again, and it'll be your fault. So there's so much going on. You don't even think nobody's told you anything. So I said it was an accident. And
Yeah.
they said, how did it happen? When the cops got there, I said, I don't know. I just kept saying, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But the cop later on that called me said, we know your husband's history. We have friends that you're friends with. We know that he struggles with some mental health issues and addiction. And I just want you to know that our report's been finalized. Nothing's going to change in it. But for the sake of your family and dealing with the hospital, if you leave it as an accident, as soon as he wakes up, he can walk out of that hospital.
Yeah.
But if you put it as a suicide attempt, he can't leave until you say so and the doctors agree on it. So I immediately, not even a hesitation, I said it was a suicide attempt. And then that was the moment where I called his brother, I called his friend Rick again, and everybody pulled together. They called the NHL team he was working for. The NHL got their doctors involved. And now he was going to be put on a path to, you cannot leave here until we all say that you're better. But that took him shooting himself.
Yeah.
So I've always thought there's got to be something else in between that you can't go from, I have a little bit of depression, ask somebody for help and say, well, until he's hurt himself or hurt you, because they don't want to hurt themselves. They want to kill themselves. And to me, that seemed like there was no in between. There was no information. There was no in between. But at this moment, I thought, okay, now they have to help.
I am so sorry for everything that you both went through, and it's so frustrating that I mean, what you've highlighted of how hard it can be to, even when you're actively trying to get help, that's it's devastating because you're right, they don't want to hurt themselves, and it's not a, they want the pain to stop, right?
Yeah.
That's the focus. And alcohol is, I think sounds like what he was using alcohol is for what a lot of people use alcohol, and it's that self-medication to help
Yeah.
with anxiety, to help with the other things. But that only works for so long, and then you get into, before you know it, it is an addiction, right?
Yeah.
What I'm trying, like, with, how did you take care of you? I can't imagine what you were going through and how you managed to keep your mental health, look after your mental health throughout that whole process.
I don't think that I did
Yeah.
during that time, because I think it's really easy just to put your own self aside and say, I will be fine if he's fine. So during that whole time, I was just doing everything I could to um, try to help or do something. I even I had a baggie and I put all of his medication in it and I took it to the pharmacy and I said, my husband's on all of this. Can you tell me if this is good to take together?
Mhm.
This is what's causing him. This is how he's acting. They couldn't tell me anything. My parents were very, very good at take care of yourself.
Mhm.
Like the night before he shot himself, I did stay in a hotel.
Mhm.
But then you come back and you think, maybe if I hadn't stayed in the hotel, it wouldn't have happened. Um,
Can't
I
think.
know in my head that's not true, but I think I'm always gonna think it.
Yeah.
I may not believe it every day, but the thought is always there. I really didn't do a lot to take care of me until he got into, when he got out of the hospital, it was all arranged through the NHL and the doctors in Reno that he would go to a rehab center, and it was all set up. They even had a gentleman that was going to come pick him up and take him straight there. He wasn't even allowed to come home. And that's where I was, from talking to the doctors and the NHL doctors, that's where they started telling me how to handle it, what to say. Because I know in the hospital, the day before this person was going to come drive him, and it was in California, it was like 4 hours away.
Mm.
His mom and him wanted me to make it okay that he could come home first. And it was a great, you know, argument on, he needs to see his animals, he needs to come home, this is too much for him. And I almost did. And then after talking to the NHL doctors and the hospital doctors, they said, as soon as he leaves this hospital and he's in your care, there's nothing we can do to get him back. And we can tell you right now that he's an addict and he's got some mental health issues and he's not going to want to go. He's going to get home because he's coming out of the hospital. He's going to feel fine. He's going to think he can handle it, and it's going to all happen again. So then I had to tell him and his mom, you're not going home. You're sitting right here in this hospital. This guy's coming to get you, and that's it. We're not talking about it anymore. So, and another funny thing was the guy that came to get him, he ended up knowing from years ago when he lived in Vegas, his very first AA meeting that he had ever been to. I guess this gentleman was at that meeting.
Wow.
So this gentleman picking him up, which probably was another godsend because they talked and they were in conversation on the whole ride, because at Clint at any point during that ride could have, when they stopped, could have just gotten out and said, I'm not going. And there's nothing this guy could have done.
Right. So so throughout that whole time span, you said in Vegas he'd gone to AA. So there was at different points recognition on his part that this was something that he did need help with and was
Yeah.
at different times trying to get help with.
Yeah, and I had found that out too, because he when he had said, yeah, I knew this guy in AA, and I thought, oh, so you've been to, he says, yeah, been to AA meetings. Um, what we found out after all this shooting and everything was that his you can address the drinking and stop it, but then you also have to keep up on the medication,
Yeah.
because if your medication's not right, that drinking, that self-medicating can creep back in there, and you think that you can handle it, and before you know it, it just completely gets out of control. I know the NHL too had sent me to a rehab. They wanted me to go to they said, we want you to go to a rehab center. And I was really offended at first. I thought, a rehab center? What did I do?
Yeah.
It wasn't that, it was a family week at the Betty Ford Center. They wanted me to go for a full week, and they wanted me to learn about addiction and what it looks like and what it does to a person. And I recommend that for anybody. I mean, I almost wish they would have that learning in schools.
I agree.
You have community courses where you learn basket weaving and sewing and auto mechanics. This should be part of it, because I mean, in my, what I always thought, if somebody drank too much, if I drink, I literally feel ill. I feel yucky, and I'm slurring, and I don't like it.
Mhm.
But for somebody who's an alcoholic, that doesn't affect them that way.
Yeah.
And the high they get from drinking, they'll never get that high they got in the first time. I learned this from people who do drugs and drink, that first high they get, it doesn't even make them feel abnormal like it does me. It makes them feel normal. Like Clint said, if I'm anxious, it calms me down. If I'm depressed, it kind of lifts me up. But if it takes you this much to feel that, the longer you drink, that doesn't work anymore. It takes this much, and then it takes this much. And it was getting to the point on Clint, and it does on most addicts, that there is not enough alcohol they can drink in a day, that they don't get that feeling of calmness
Right.
or not being depressed anymore. So then they're just drinking themselves, and they're killing their body, they're killing their organs, they're killing their brain, and it's just not working.
Is there anything you would recommend, like with everything that you went through, for someone that um, might be in a similar position as yourself, where they're recognizing something in a partner or a family member or a friend, how to, when to get involved, how to start getting involved, or how to start having conversations, or anything that you feel that they should know that would help them with that journey?
Yeah, I would say that if you think something's going on, I mean, say it to your loved one right away. If it's your spouse, your friend, just say it, because it's there. They know it. And as hard as it is to bring it up, and they're going to deny it, I think the sooner you can get it out there and just start talking about it, and reach out to your community, reach out to the mental health facilities and ask, do they have family education? Do they have family weeks? Is there someplace I can go where I can learn about this? I know everybody says Al-Anon. For me, I did try a second meeting, and I just couldn't, it didn't work for me. I did find a family group where we could go and talk about what was going on, and I learned a little bit more, but my best education was that family week through the Betty Ford Center. So if they can find to find out what it looks like, and how it's going to work, how you can help yourself, how you can. One thing I learned too was when I would drink, that don't engage in conversation, that it's going to get you nowhere.
Yeah.
And if the person that you're trying to get to stop doing drugs or stop drinking, every time they drink, if your reaction is, I'm not going to engage with you while you're drinking or you're doing drugs, then they'll start to, oh, I'm not going to get a reaction out of this person. So you're taking yourself away. It's hard, especially when you live in the same house. The comment was always just, remove yourself. Where do I go?
Yeah.
So I would just say, I'm not talking to you while you're like this. I'm not talking to you while you're doing this. And then after a while, he would come in and say, we need to talk. And I'd look at him, he goes, oh, but I guess you're not going to talk to me because I've been drinking. And he would go. So it took a while, but then
Mhm.
he would leave and go away. You asked me earlier too, how I took care of myself. And I said, I really didn't. And it was, I think probably about 6 years after all of this happened, we were, I don't remember where we were. We were speaking together because now we speak together about mental health and everything. And for some reason, the night before, I was just so upset. And this was like 6 years after it. And I remember him looking at me like, what's wrong? We talk about this all the time. And I said, I just feel like you're the one that has depression. You're the one that has anxiety. Everything's always about you, taking care of you, how you're doing better, how you got through it. I remember looking up, going, what about me? And I think that the better he got, the less I felt like I had to be on watch and take care of him. So my stuff started coming up.
Yeah.
And you're just mad. You're like,
Yeah.
you know, look at what I went through, and nobody recognized it. So that also made me think that you watch these couples and these families that go through this horrific traumatic experience, and you think they made it, they got through it. But then years later, why are they splitting up? And I
Yeah.
know that's what it is. That as much as I felt like I had it together, and I did, I would go to the ice rink, I would teach lessons, and I would keep it together.
It's
But
survival mode.
it is. And when your guard starts to go down because now you feel like you don't have to be their caretaker, all your stuff starts coming up.
Yeah.
And I know 2 years ago, what I finally did for me is I thought everything I did was wrapped around what he did. We worked
Mm.
together. He's a horse dentist and chiropractor. I would go to work with him and help him. I took a job as a skating director in Reno. That was the best thing I could have done because
Something
it
for
gave
you.
me my thing, and
Yeah.
it gave me my time to be me and do what I love that had nothing to do with him. And
Mhm.
I think you both need your separate lives and things you do to feel good and feel accomplished. Then when you come back together, you look at everything in a whole different light.
Yeah, that's a very valid point, and it's very easy when you are in that support role to lose yourself
Yeah,
in being that support person, especially when you are worried about their life, whether they're going to be able to get through what they're going through.
yeah.
This has been an incredible conversation. I know that just watching this will help so many people, and I'm so thankful for you to join us today and for being open to share everything that you've shared. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
And I thank you very much.
If anyone is looking for resources, they can visit our website. That's domore.ag. Thank you very much for watching.